Barry, and The Lost Order, which I think is his 15th book. It's really special for us because Steve, in fact, was here for his very first book, The Amber Room, and we were muttering around in the back. What do you think we had?
Right over there. I sat right over there with like 10 books.
Something like that, right. However, let me say this one more time because I try to encourage you. The time to come is when we have a new author. You will never be able to say, I was there with Steve Berry's first book, if in fact you're not here, right? And it's very easy to turn out for bestsellers, but sometimes, it takes a little more effort to come for a first novelist, and I'm sure that Steve appreciated those who did show up.
It was nice.
With The Amber Room, right?
I came all the way out here, and you don't know what to expect when you get out here, and I'd
in
already
the desert.
Well, I'd already done some stores before you, and nobody came. Like zero. I actually ran a streak in the chain stores back then. Chain stores were a big deal. You actually went to chain stores and had events back in those days, and I went to like 5, 6 in a row. No one showed up. I had like a whole streak going. So I think this is one of the very first events where people actually came.
Well, they actually
had people come. Yeah,
because they have listened to us, and it was really exciting. The Amber Room is such a cool topic. I have been to see it. How many of you have been to St. Petersburg and gone to visit what is in fact the replica, because the real one has never been found? Have any of you been to see it?
Yeah, I've been twice. I went twice. It's really cool.
It's really cool. Yeah,
it's an amazing thing. We did an interview, and the NBC reporter, I forgot his name, he's out of Chicago. He interviewed me, and he had a great line. He said he called it was like standing in a jewelry box, and that's a great line. It's a great line, and it's just what it feels like. If they let you stand there more than 6 seconds, because they hustle you in. What you do, a little trick, when you go out the room, if you just go around and make a circle, you can go back through again. Just swing around. Don't go straight. Swing around that way, because you're in a grand hall when you come out. And I learned that little trick, so I just kept going around. But when I went in 95, the room was only a third finished, and I spent 2 days there in the room. There was nobody there. I was it. And I got to go into the workshop and watch them build it and everything. It was incredible.
It is incredible. And as a further tip, should you ever go, sign up for the evening concert, because all the Japanese tourists don't come. And then you can actually sit there in the hall and go through the... Yeah, there really is. Well, anyway, moving on, you have written 14 books since, and was it like 4 or 5 books ago that you decided that rather than deal with international kinds of historical events, like, for example, China and the first emperor and all that good stuff, that you were going to focus on American? Why'd you make that decision?
Well, I had 5 constitutional ideas in my head that I had noticed, quirks in the Constitution that I had read about. Article 1, Section 8, the letters of marque, the 20th Amendment, the 16th Amendment, the concept of secession. There was a whole bunch of them I wanted to do, and so I decided to shift and do those 5 books before anyone else maybe grabbed those ideas and got them, and now I've done them all. They're done. This is the last one with that. Have a little bit more domestic next year, but not constitutional. And then I'm going back international. Going back. Okay. Yeah, going to go back and it'll be international with a little American. So it's the opposite, and we'll get back into that feel again of the international feel.
I thought it was probably some more prosaic thing, like he got seduced by his constitutional law professor when he was in law school or something.
That sounds good, though. I should have thought about that. Make it cooler. No, it was just that I wanted to do them before someone else got to them, though probably was no danger of anyone getting to them. They're a little odd, the subject matter, but they made for good thrillers. They made for very interesting constitutional thrillers, and so I've done those now, and now I'm going to go back. I'm working on the 2019 book. Deals with the island of Malta, which is a really cool place. Malta's really cool, so that's the one I'm working on now.
Tell me about the book that you published last year, which you probably wrote in 2014. How was it trying to look ahead to what was clearly going to be a contentious election year and figure out your footing?
Well, I knew that I wanted to end Danny Daniels' term, and I wanted to end it in 16 when the election was going on. And you're absolutely right. I wrote the book in 14, turned it in 15. So it's long before anything ever happened in the election year. And I was just fortunate. The election year was very contentious and very interesting, and everyone got involved. And the book actually deals with how you succeed to the presidency in a very unusual situation. So I guessed right. That's what the cool part. I took a guess. I have to think ahead. I have to think what you're going to like 2 years from now. That's what I have to. Right now, I'm writing a book for 2019. And I have to think what's going to be exciting, what's going to be interesting, what's going to be timely, but not too timely. As I said, if I get too timely, I can write myself in a corner because events can overtake me. So I got to be careful, not go too far. But it was interesting. It worked out very well. And then the paperback, of course, came out 2 weeks before Inauguration Day, so it worked out very well.
So Danny Daniel is from East Tennessee. What a coincidence. What is it a coincidence of?
It's a coincidence of, in this book, Danny is gone now. He's out of office, which the real Danny Daniels really hated, by the way. He's a fire chief in our old county, and he did not like. I'll be with him, in fact, next Thursday, and I know he's ready because he's probably read this by now. Because I told him last year, "Don't worry, you're okay." So he's coming back at a new job, and it's a fun job because I can actually use him now as a point of view character. So we actually went into Danny's head in this book, and it's the only time I've never been in his head before, and so we got to hear his thoughts. We got to explore his relationship with Stephanie. He's out of office, and he now becomes a United States Senator, and that's only happened one other time with Andrew Johnson. Actually did that, and Johnson's from East Tennessee, and Danny's from East Tennessee, and that was a total coincidence. I didn't realize that. When I realized I wanted to give him a new job, I was looking up about putting him in Congress, and I came across that fact with Andrew Johnson. So it worked out well, and Danny does something that only one other president has done. He refuses Secret Service protection. So he has no Secret Service protection as an ex-president. You do not have to have Secret Service protection if you don't want it. And only one president did that. That was the first George Bush did it. He refused it. So he refused it. He doesn't want babysitters. He wants to move around freely. He doesn't care if somebody wants to shoot him. Come shoot me. I don't care. He wants to be free. He wants to go where he wants to go and do what he wants.
He's in his 80s, so maybe he has the longer perspective. I'm really crushed. I thought that you had set up Danny Daniels to be Andrew Johnson, taking a super long view. And it was just a coincidence?
Just a coincidence.
Oh,
it absolutely worked out because I was saying I want Danny in Congress. So I was deciding where to put him, and I was doing some research, and all at once I saw, holy crap, Andrew Johnson, and he's from 2 counties up from Danny, where he is. It was just one of those fortuitous coincidences.
It's an interesting thing that Andrew Johnson became a senator because he was almost impeached, right? Remember that?
So, he was impeached. He wasn't convicted.
Sorry,
wasn't convicted.
Sorry,
wasn't
you're
convicted.
Right. They're totally different.
But he only served as a senator a couple of months. He died before he actually got appointed. He was sworn in, and he was a senator. But only served a couple of months before he died.
So, moving on, am I right in remembering that William Howard Taft became a Supreme Court justice
Chief Justice.
after he was president?
Correct.
Is that the only one of those guys?
Only one of those, and there's one other. John Quincy Adams left the presidency and went into Congress.
That's right.
And so there's been 3 who have moved from one branch to the other. Now Danny, 4. He's real to me. He's real.
And maybe the next guy will show up as one of the Supremes. I mean, we can always see how this is going to work out. Now that we actually have 9 Supremes again, it'll be kind of...
I want to do a book with the Supreme Court at some point, and that's the one branch of government I really haven't touched much. We touched the Chief Justice in here, but only because he's Chancellor of the Smithsonian. But I'd like to do something with the Supreme Court one day.
Okay. So, Lost Order, why did you call it Lost Order? It's an interesting title.
It has a double meaning. So you'll see a double meaning in here. The Lost Order meaning the Knights of the Golden Circle that are gone now, but maybe not. And then there's another kind of Lost Order that's also in here as well. So it's a double meaning, which is interesting because I would have never had the double meaning, and I was writing the end of the book, and it occurred to me all at once, I can make this a double meaning. So that wasn't planned either. It just, I can do it. And so it works in. And I don't want to say what that is. It will give away a surprise in the novel, but it has a double meaning, words do.
So when you start out with just sort of a general idea for a book, what do? Do you fare forth and start researching things,
yes.
and then stuff comes to you
yes.
rising out of that?
Yeah, I knew about the Knights of the Golden Circle. I'd known about them for a long, long time. I just didn't know a lot about them. So I went and got the books and started reading, and I began to formulate things. And the plot begins to form at that point, and how I can put it together. It all comes during the research. And then I just little tidbits here and there, and I go through 300 to 400 books, and I look for those tidbits and begin to put the novel together, and it forms slowly. It's a very slow process, almost like Legos when you're building, one brick at a time, literally one brick at a time. I don't know what it's going to look like when I'm done. I'm just putting the bricks in there, and I'm hoping when they're done they're going to have a nice look to them.
How many books do you actually have going on in your head at any one time?
3, always.
Always 3?
Always 3. And there's a moment when there's 4. That moment just passed. I did the final edits for next year's book. Done. Just finished those last week. So I had 4 as up to last week, and now I'm writing 19. I'm researching and outlining 20 and conceptualizing 21. So it was always 3 because of the research involved. That's what makes it that. That's why I have to do that. Most novelists don't have to do that, but with the research involved, for me to stay on that schedule, I have to stay that far ahead.
Well, one of the reasons I asked was I was wondering is as you are researching one, does something come along that you sort of stick ahead to conceptualize?
Yes.
Does one leap out from another?
It does, and sometimes I think I want to do this one, and then as I'm conceptualizing, I realize, no, I need to switch the order. And I've done that. I switched the order. The Malta book, for example, has been switched like 4 times. I should have done it about 4 books ago, and then I said no, something else interesting more. No, and I put it off. But now I'm not. No more. Now I'm actually doing it.
So how much does the characters that you've created, specifically Cotton, do they limit in any way the kind of story that you want to write, or is he, so flexible that you can do nearly anything?
He doesn't limit me, no, but the secondary characters do limit me some. Cassiopeia particularly can get in the way sometimes. I mean, I'll be honest with you. Elizabeth's over there. She's looking at me like, Cotton was not supposed to be monogamous. There was no rule that was supposed to be, but someone in my house decreed that he would be monogamous, and so he became monogamous. I wanted him to play the field so I could have a different character. It's more for the writer, from the craft standpoint. But I broke him up in 14th Colony, and I was going to leave and broke up, to be honest with you. And she came in and she said, "You ain't doing that." I, no way. I said, "Yeah, I am in my books." I said, "No, you're not." She said, "You're not doing that." So of course she came back in 14th Colony, kind of a big splash that she made in there. What people don't realize is a lot of the conversations between Elizabeth and I, between Cotton and Cassiopeia, are literally exact conversations we have had. If you remember in the 14th Colony, when he comes home, when he's in trouble, he's on the ice, they're shooting at him, and he's got problems. All at once, a helicopter comes in, saves his butt. Helicopter lands, someone gets out, walks over, he realizes it's her. Now, he hasn't seen her in many months since they broke up, and it's first time, and she walks right up, and he looks at her, and she looks right at him, she says, "Don't speak." That's her. That's exactly what she says. She says, "Don't speak. You will ruin it if you open your mouth. Don't speak." And then she kisses him, and everything is great, And she has done that to me a million times. She tells me not to speak. So, Cassiopeia can sometimes be in the way. She is in this book. She will not be in next year's book because it's a back book going back about 18 years. You're going to learn next year how the Magellan Billet started, how it all started. And then she will not be in the Malta book because I wanted to interact him and Luke more. I wanted that to be more of a kind of a little boy's book. Now she'll come back in 20 with a book that will focus on her. That will actually be her. So that's what happens. The secondary characters kind of get in the way sometimes because I have to spend time developing those. I have to assume in every novel that you've never read a Cotton Malone book. I can't assume that you've done that. So it takes pages to bring all that up. So from a novelist standpoint, it's better to start fresh each time. That's why the Reacher books are so magical, because there is nothing, there's no backstory, there's no nothing. Reacher comes into town, there's nothing he doesn't have to tell anything about anybody on anything. It's a magical, wonderful thing that makes you free as a novelist. Yeah.
I'm convinced that he watched Shane while he was thinking about Reacher, you know? It's a Western. Rides into town on the bus, cleans up the town, romances the girl, waves goodbye.
And leaves.
Off he goes. And you're right, it is a magical
Only owns a toothbrush, has no connection. That's it. I mean, from a novelist standpoint, it's wonderful because I don't have to worry about any backstory whatsoever. Great.
Yeah, the only thing you have to remember is what Reacher actually looks like, so he doesn't suddenly change eye color or shrink or whatever. However, you raised a really interesting point, which I'll diverge off here and ask you about. I have this theory that, you know, when you start a series, you have to put you pluck your characters, and they are a certain age, and they have a certain story that you give them in the whole bit. And then you go forward. But I am convinced that virtually anyone who writes a series at some point wants to go back and explore that character before you did that.
I did that. I wanted to do that, yes.
And
so did Lee. He did the same thing.
Well, he did.
Yeah.
But what is the pull?
Well, you want to go back and get that beginning. What made him be what he is, you know, and what you've developed. Like in my case, by then I would have done 12 books with Cotton. So I know pretty much how he is today. I've got a pretty good feel for him today, but I don't know what he was 18 years ago when he was a young JAG lawyer looking to get out and was bored to tears with what he was doing, and his marriage was a little rocky. Things weren't going very good there. And what happens when Stephanie Nell comes to him for the very first time, and why does she come to see him for the very first time, and what does he get caught up in? And that fascinated me. So next year's book will deal with that. It's also very interesting. It's first person, so it's going to be all Cotton next year. And so him and I got really, really close in the writing of this book.
Well, I can see that.
But
close. It's an interesting thing, because you can't change the person that he is, his future, so to speak. But you've got a lot of freedom
in the back,
inventing. So you're actually giving yourself that sort of reinvention opportunity that we were just talking about by going back and doing something. And you really can't do that. I thought Michael Connelly kind of pushed it when he did it in book 4, I think it was. It was a little early for Harry.
I waited. Lee actually told me that. He said he actually advised me that. He said wait a while.
Yeah.
He said wait a while, and I did. I waited till now, and it was like writing the first Cotton book again.
Sure.
It actually was, because there's no one in his life at this point. Gary's not even born at this point. He doesn't have a son. He doesn't have anything. Everything's sort of free. And it will deal with something very interesting. It's going to be very topical next year. Next year is the 50th anniversary of the death of Martin Luther King. So the book will deal with the Martin Luther King assassination, something very interesting that I came across, and I think you're going to be fascinated to learn some things.
I want to learn how come you picked up Bookseller to be.
Because I like books. I love books. And so I wanted to make him unique, and so I said, since I like books, and I always wanted to be a bookseller, but I knew I never would be a bookseller, so I made him the bookseller. Yeah.
I love it. It's so great. There's a whole sort of subgenre in thrillers and crime fiction called biblio mysteries or biblio whatever, and of course I'm always drawn to them because, that's what I do, and I think it's so fascinating. But I also find that readers really like those, or maybe it's because they're embraced by booksellers who then thrust them upon readers, and you don't really have a lot of choice. I'm not sure.
I just thought it'd be cool for him to own a bookshop, particularly in Copenhagen. There's a lot of bookshops in Copenhagen. They're loaded up all over the place there, and I just thought it'd be really cool for him to be that. But he doesn't stay there very much, I've started making more references to it because readers would write me and say, what about his bookshop? What's going on? And so I actually do make a reference now in every book of something's going on, or he's conscious that, because he's never there, for gosh sakes,
He has a reliable staff.
He does. He does.
Right. And I just saw the other day a list of the 50 best restaurants in the world today. They're always reassessing it. And for a long time, Noma in Copenhagen was the #1 restaurant in the world. It was the really hot ticket. So, is he too poor a bookseller to actually eat at Noma?
Yeah, and he's a picky eater. He's like me. He wouldn't eat there. We call that foo-foo food. So we wouldn't eat the foo-foo food. No. He likes meat and potatoes. He's a very basic guy. And if you've been to Copenhagen, a lot of their food is very different. You got the raw fish.
A lot of it is aquatic, right?
Yeah, and it's not the kind that I would normally eat. So he sticks to the Café Nordon and the food there. It's safe there.
They do designer sandwiches and things like that.
Very, very foo-foo food. Yes, that
so you've been on the road now, so you must have a really nice little presentation about Lost Order that I haven't let you tell. So feel
doing
free.
great.
You know, just you want to roll into it?
No, it's the book deals with the largest, most dangerous clandestine organization ever created in this country, called the Knights of the Golden Circle, and they are real. And you hear them occasionally if you watch National Treasure 2. The beginning of it dealt with that, but they kind of deal with it in a hokey way. I mean, it's not the way. These guys started out as a political organization. They were going to rewrite they were going to redraw the map and add 11 new states to the Union and change the balance of power. They wanted to work within the Constitution. But the Civil War came along and changed everything, and they became the South's counterintelligence unit. And they were really good at what they did. They wreaked havoc in the North. And they also were something else very good. They stole. They were good thieves. They stole gold and silver by the tons from banks, individuals, governments, 2 U.S. mints. And they buried the gold and silver all across the South. And they left clues how to find it in the trees and in the rocks. If you can decipher the clues, you can find it. And some folks have done that. In Chapter 1, the treasure hunt is a combination of 3 treasure hunts that actually happened in the 1990s where they found gold. And I just combined them into this one hunt. But they never found the big stuff, the huge caches. The rumor is they're actually out here in the Southwest, in the American Southwest. And the book climaxes in the Carson National Forest. So, and no one really knows. New Mexico, Arizona, somewhere out here. What you may not realize, the Civil War was not fought just on the eastern seaboard. The Civil War was fought all across the country, particularly here. There were major battles in the Southwest because the South wanted to control the Southwest so that they could bring California in. And California was very sympathetic to the Confederacy. But if California had come in and that had happened, the war could have gone another way. But the Knights were there, and so I wove them in with the Smithsonian. The Smithsonian is near and dear to me. I serve on the Smithsonian Libraries Advisory Board. We oversee the 21 libraries in the Smithsonian system. And you're getting a bookmark here tonight when you buy the book from there, and a letter from me and about the libraries. It's a very neat, cool thing, and I wanted to put cotton in that world. And you're going to learn a lot about the Smithsonian, the really interesting stuff behind the scenes that's not hokey but real, the real stuff. And some interesting things. We took 50 people around Tuesday night in the Smithsonian Castle. They paid $1,000 apiece for the privilege. All that money went to the Smithsonian Libraries, $50,000, and we took them around in a private tour and showed them all the cool stuff that's in the book that you will see in the novel. You will also learn something in this novel. You will learn how cotton got his name. Finally, and no long story anymore. It is the story. We do have to mention, though, that there's an antagonist in the novel. She's a lady. She's a senator's wife, and she's named after Diane right here. Diane Sherwood is named after her, and Alex is the senator, but unfortunately Alex is dead. I told him, you're dead in the book, but your name gets mentioned an awful lot. A lot gets mentioned in there. So, but Diane became she's one of our ducks from our Steve Berry trips. So I told her she was going to be a bad lady, and she said, okay, I want to be a bad lady. So she got it. Oh, I won't touch that. She is the antagonist in the novel, and there's other ducks that go on the trip. I named some of the characters in there as well. But it's an interesting story. It also deals with something very fascinating from the Constitution, and this is something you may not know. The Senate of the United States was created by the Founding Fathers to get in the way of the House of Representatives. That was its job. They actually built gridlock into the Constitution. That is not really a bad word, because the Founding Fathers actually wanted the Senate to slow the House of Representatives down, because the Founding Fathers were very suspicious of popular rule. So that's why senators were appointed by legislatures in those days. And so the senators were like the House of Lords. And the senators did. They grew into that power, and they eventually created the filibuster. And they became the most powerful legislative body ever created by man, and they remain that today. To this day, one senator can shut down the entire government. But here's the cool thing. One little change about that long, to the House of Representatives rules of procedure, and you can completely eviscerate the Senate of the United States. You can shut it down, make it impotent, and you would make the Speaker of the House the most powerful man in the country. I ran this by the parliamentarian for the House of Representatives, and he said it's perfectly legal. There's nothing to prevent that from happening. So that's the so what in the novel. So you're going to learn something very interesting about House and Senate rules and how one little sentence, just a few words, could utterly change everything.
So you want to define nuclear option, since that has been all
this
over?
This would be beyond that. This would be super nuclear option, because you would literally shut the Senate down. The Senate would be completely irrelevant. You wouldn't care what they say or do. It would be merely one little change to a rule. Just a silly little rule. House and Senate rules are set by the power is given to them by the Constitution. They can set whatever rules they want, and those are unreviewable by courts. So it can be done. So we've heard a lot about that. It's kind of interesting. The novel deals with rules, and of course, what happened this week, we talked about a lot about rules this week and Senate rules. So, but again, I wrote that 2 years ago. So a little prophetic.
You and your crystal ball.
I got a little crystal ball there.
Yeah, it's great. So tell us, just remind us, for those people who don't know, about Joseph Smithson and his legacy, which is where the Smithsonian comes from.
It's an interesting story that most people don't know. Joseph Smithson was an innocuous, unknown British chemist. Nothing amazing about him at all, except that he amassed a little bit of money, about $500,000, which today would be around $18 million if you equate it from that time. He lived in the early part of the 19th century, and he died, and he left all of his money to his nephew. And if his nephew had married and had children, we wouldn't be even talking about this right now, but he didn't. He died, and the money was still there. And the will said this: if that happens, the money was to go to Washington, D.C., to establish the Smithsonian Institution for the increase and diffusion of knowledge of men. That's pretty amazing that he wanted to create this thing, and he had it in. Here's what's even more amazing: he never set foot here. He never had any connection with America. He never came here. He lived in Europe all of his life. He had nothing to connect him to America, yet he wanted that money left here. And the money came here. Took 11 years of Congress arguing about it, and finally in 1846 they punched it through and created the Smithsonian Institution that went on. They built the castle, which was finished in 1855, the big red building on the mall, and it burned in January of 1865, which is the prologue of this novel. And so you're going to learn all about that and why that is significant.
How many branches of the Smithsonian are there going up and down the mall in Washington now?
Quite a few, a whole bunch. You got American history, natural history, American Indian, air and space. African American is just opened. The castle itself.
The Freer Gallery part
Freer Gallery is part of that.
And the Hirshhorn?
Absolutely.
Right, and the Air and Space Museum.
Air and Space, all of that on the south side of the mall are all Smithsonian buildings. The north are all Smithsonian except the National Gallery, right. But it is kind of quasi. It's not governed by the Smithsonian, but it was put under its umbrella years ago, but it has its own governing institution.
It does, and it had its own founding fathers. Yes. There's actually a founding fathers room inside the gallery when they remodeled it. So it's an interesting, but that's one reason these institutions are all free, as compared to if you go to New York and pay the tariff at some of the museums in New York.
And what most people don't realize is the government only pays 80% of the cost of the Smithsonian. Right. The other 20% has to be raised each year by each museum. For the libraries, that's $3.5 million we have to raise every year to keep the doors open. Is
there a library in each of the museums?
Every museum has a library. Every research facility has a library. Now, you wouldn't see it. It's out of the way. But it's the heart of the institution. It's where all the knowledge of that institution is. Collectively, the 21 libraries are one of the largest repositories of knowledge on earth together. We have an amazing amount of information in there, and it's all available free to anyone in the world. And as I said, we raise that money each year, and the other night we raised $50,000 that goes to help keep those doors open.
Well, some of the money that you're selling tonight is going to the Smithsonian,
that's right.
Too.
I didn't realize that's right. That's right.
Going to make a donation.
Making a little donation. We like that very much.
Our mutual friend, Nancy, she and I were interns together at the Library of Congress, so she's a longtime friend.
Nancy Gwynn's head of the Smithsonian Library. Yep. She's in charge of them.
And her husband works at the Library of Congress.
John Cole.
But he has a new title
He is the historian of the Library of Congress now.
Yes, he was the head of the Center for the Book for ages.
But now he's the historian of it.
Which is very cool. Right. Anything else you want to say about laws?
We'll take some questions.
Yes,
let's
exactly.
do it. Yes, sir. Well, I'm partial to air and space. I mean, I love air and space, but I love the castle. I mean, the castle draws me back, even though it doesn't look anything like on the inside what it looked like way back. But I like to visualize what it looked like way back. There's a lot of pictures in there where you can do that. So the castle, to me, is cool. But air and space has a really, I like that. I love space. I love all about that. All that in there. The whole place is amazing. That library, that building needs a lot of work, though. It's going to cost a lot of money. The panels on the outside are coming off. They were improperly installed 40 years ago, and they didn't install them right. And over time now they've cracked, and they've all got to be removed and put back on. It's going to cost like $60 million or something.
It's a beautiful marble.
Yeah,
is it that kind of pink?
It was improperly put on the. Yes, ma'am. Oh, they stole all the gold. I'm going to tell you, it's actually in the book, but I'll tell you, it won't give anything away. They were planning for a second Civil War. They wanted to go back and do what they originally wanted to do. Now, the Knights really were not a militant organization when they started. They were a political organization. They became a militant organization. So they were holding the money, and it never happened. It never came to pass. And the caches that are located all over the South are guarded by men called sentinels. And these are local men who keep an eye on everything there. And it passed from generation to generation. And we know this because there are people who have investigated this for years and years, and they found sentinels and talked to them. But time just made it all irrelevant after a while. But it's still in the ground. They found only a tiny little fraction of all that gold and silver.
If you think about it, trees are not necessarily a long-lived marker. Trees are fairly fragile.
Well, that was the sentinel's job, to make sure that they would shape the trees. They would cut the branches and make them look like goalposts. Now, you wouldn't even notice that unless you were looking very carefully the way they had them, because there's pictures. I've seen pictures of these trees. They would carve on the trees emblems and symbols. You had to learn to follow those symbols. They would bury in the ground pieces of iron about 2 or 3 inches below the ground, because if you pass a compass over that, the compass will react. It's like a primitive magnetometer, and they would use that. They were very clever, very, very clever at what they did, but time has rendered a lot of that very tough to decipher now. But Cotton figures it out. He figures it out. He's smart. He'll figure it out.
You're going to be right at home with Knights when you go to Malta.
I love that. Yeah, the Knights of Malta. That's what the whole book's about. The Knights of Malta.
Knights of Malta. Really formidable.
They are really, really cool.
In fact, if I remember right, the siege of Malta was maybe the single bloodiest siege ever, wasn't it?
1565.
Saladin versus the Knights of Malta.
Massive thing. It's all. I went there twice. I love the place, and so I'm writing the whole novel's going to deal with the Knights and everything about them.
You haven't mentioned, because it was an earlier book, the Society of the Cincinnati, if I got that right. Who were they? Because you really seem to like these secret organizations.
They were the oldest fraternal organization in America, and they are in 14th Colony, and they were formed in the Revolutionary War, and they still exist. They still exist this day, and I went to their headquarters at Anderson House in D.C., and they're all in the 14th Colony. If you want to learn all about the Society of Cincinnati, we were just in Cincinnati, which is named for the society, actually, because it was founded by one of the members of the society in the hopes that some of the members would come and settle out there.
And named for a Roman, if I remember right, called Cincinnatus. And what was the significance
He was an interesting guy. He was a farmer. And they went to him and said, we need you to take command of Rome and lead the army. We're being invaded. You're the best general we know. They made him emperor. He did it. He went. He defeated the army, and he promptly gave up the power, gave it back, and went back to his farm. And that's what their symbol was, is that we fought the revolution, we give up the power, we go back to where we came from. So Cincinnatus is their symbol.
My God, he was like George Washington.
Except George Washington, yes. George Washington served the 2 terms and then gave it up. He could have served forever.
And he could have been a king.
He could have in a heartbeat, but he chose not to. By the way, he was the first president of the Society of Cincinnati.
Was he?
George Washington.
Maybe that inspired him. I've always thought how incredibly fortunate. If you look at the fate of most revolutions, they wind up with Napoleon or they wind up with Stalin or saying, we got George Washington. We were unbelievably lucky. I think, no, I'm really serious. He's a man who could have gone in a whole different direction, but he went home.
He did exactly right. He set that tone, and that's been our tone ever since. We have a peaceful transition of power from transition.
Right.
Any more questions? I would like to say we do have a couple of other novelists here. I just want to... On the what? Magellan Billy? Let me tell you, we have two novelists here now. I got two New York Times bestsellers here. Grant Blackwood, there you are. Let me see, Grant. Come on, stand up. Kristen Ashley's here. Kristen, where are you? Well, we got two locals here that live here, two New York Times bestsellers, and they've come out. I appreciate
Grant
it.
has come to see us, but I haven't met Kristen.
She's here, and so you'll get to know her. Kristen Ashley, right there.
It's very nice to see you here.
She did a very much, but you weren't here. You were not here.
I was not here.
Well,
that explains why I don't recognize you, doesn't it?
You had a question about where the Magellan Billy come from. I just made it up. Yeah, and the crazy part is when I made it up that day, I needed a name for it, and the name just popped in my head. I don't know where it came from. It just, boom, there it was, and I said, well, okay, let's go with that. And I put it down there. It was weird how it just came Magellan Billet, and I just named it that. And so I needed something within the Justice Department, and I just sort of made it up. Now, next year, you're going to learn how it started. You'll learn where it came from, how it started, why it started, and the whole purpose behind it.
So there's one other thing that we could talk about, which is that Steve is very active, and his wife Liz, in the International Thriller Writers Organization, which is super, and it started here, but it actually meets in New York City now.
It does.
How many years has it been? Are we coming
10 years, 11 years now. We were here in 2006 for the very first Thriller Fest. We get together every year in July where all the thriller writers come together. We have about 1,000 people, and it's a summer camp for thriller writers and thriller enthusiasts. You're welcome to come as well. We did the first one here in the pool at the Biltmore, which was really cool.
Right.
And we realized that it wasn't going to work in the pool every year. We had it was great for 1 year, and it was wonderful, but we needed to move to New York, where the center of publishing is, because we have an enormous amount of agents and editors, and it's a working time for all of us, but it's also great for the fans. We're getting more and more fans come because we have no breakdown there. There's no walls between us and fans. Everybody's just there together. There's no secret rooms. There's no place to go and hide. You're all right there together, and we have a great time. It'll be in July this year. Elizabeth my wife is executive director of ITW, so she runs it, and she helped create Thriller Fest. Her and Kathy Antrim put it together and created it. Mm-hmm.
Well, that's not the entire origin story, but close enough.
Well, I'm talking about after the first year. After the first year. Yeah, the first year you were there, and you were there with some other.
It actually stemmed out of a Poison Pen conference.
It did. I remember that.
A number of authors were there and were not happy with other professional organizations.
Correct.
And I got really annoyed at them, and I'll clean this up. And I finally said, stop whining. Why don't you form your own organization?
Gail Lynn and David Morrell listened to you.
David Morrell and Lee Child and Kathy Reichs and Vince Flynn, who was still with us then.
They did.
It was...
You had a conference here that kind of got the ball rolling.
And it was just by a fluke that all the authors who were at it that June were thriller writers. It had never happened before.
And then it snowballed from there.
Right, and there was a really glaring omission in the sense of a professional support organization for writers. So I'm really thrilled. That's the only reason I was here at the Biltmore, which was never the right venue for it. But they were just being nice because we started it.
And that's what happened. After
it belongs in New York.
After we left here, that's when Elizabeth and them took over, and it began to grow. The one here was just like kind of magical. It was just a little magical. All the thriller writers in the pool and plotting books, and it was just one of those. It was like a big vacation in some regards. And then we realized we needed to change the focus a little bit.
Plus, it was July in Phoenix.
Yeah.
But anyway, this is a long, slow curve to saying that ITW does fundraisers, and one thing that they do is the members contribute stories. There's been was it a digital one that Jeffrey Deaver did? I'm trying to remember.
He did, and that was the audio book of the year.
That was it, right? Okay, and they've done some others.
It was a Chopin manuscript, is what that was.
That's it.
Chopin manuscript.
All right. So the book for this year, which comes out on June 13th, is called Matchup. Those of you who get the e-news, I wrote to you about it today. And there are various authors who have paired together, male and female, to write stories. So it's Lee Child and Kathy Reichs. Kathy will be here in July. And David Morrell and Gail Lynn's back from, their deal.
We did that on purpose because they were founders.
Of course, absolutely.
Rambo will be in that story, by the way.
You are?
That's a Rambo story.
Oh, it is a Rambo story.
Yeah, it's a Rambo story.
So David gets to go all the way back to his very own.
That's a Rambo story.
Right, but now here's the brilliance. Steve wrote a story with Diana Gabaldon, and it's Cotton Malone and Jamie Fraser, and they have to solve a time travel issue, and it's fabulous. And so we're doing an event in June for Match Up with Diana. And unfortunately, Steve has got a prior obligation, but he is signing book plates to leave behind. But I want to encourage you to buy Match Up because it's really a fabulous group of stories.
It's a clever story.
And the money is raised from it, supports the International.
We don't charge dues. We don't no dues.
Right. Did you guys donate your stories?
Yes. What happens in ITW is all the writers donate their stories, and then Lee donates his time as editor, and I helped Lee. I was managing editor, so I helped him. So two of us put the book together, and we donate all of our time, and we donate all of our stories. We don't get paid either. All the money. In fact, so you'll know, Simon Schuster paid the largest advance ever paid for an anthology for Face Off, the first one, and then they matched that again for Match Up. So, yeah.
Oh, what was in Face Off? Because that was absolutely brilliant. I remember Deaver had this incredible story.
Yes, we had.
With
we had John Deaver and John Sanford were together, and then myself and Jim Rollins were together in that story. I'm trying to remember them all now. There were 22 of them, and that was a New York Times bestseller. Did very well. We're hoping Match Up's going to likewise hit the New York Times list. This one has an even better lineup. Really does. It's a solid lineup of male, female. They take their iconic characters and square them off against one another. So in my case, Cotton goes back in the stone. So he's heading back. And he's not quite sure what's happening to him, but he's heading back.
Right. I don't think I'd call it better. It's different, and I think it's a brilliant concept. I love Face Off. I thought the stories in that were great, but I've also liked Match Up. I got to read it already.
Yeah,
that's one of the good things about being a bookseller. You get to have
what we did in each book. Early. We didn't repeat anybody. The only people repeated was Lee. And
why did you do that?
Because
That's the obvious
question. He's the editor. He's the editor of the book, so we had to repeat there. And John Sanford repeated, and Lee repeated, and Peter James because Peter lives in England, and we have
Peter and Val McDermott. That's right. That was another pairing.
Those are the only three that we repeated. All the others were new. We try to keep them fresh, so we don't do the same thing.
Lisa Scottolini is with
Nelson DeMille.
Both of whom will be here, but later, and so it's really going to be fun. So I'm all excited.
Oh, it's a good book. It'll be out June 13th, and check it out. I mean, give it a check. We're trying to see if we can get on that list again. I want to try to see if I can get first week New York Times again.
Or you can come to our event on June 10th and get your copy early.
That's right. You get the privilege of selling it a few days early. That's right.
Right.
That's
We're going to do it at the Andes Resort. Do you remember where the Borgata was on Scottsdale Road? You would be amazed if you now drive in there and instead of turning right to the restaurants, turn left. There's like 25 acres of amazing hotel, and it goes all the way back. It's just absolutely gorgeous. So I worked out a deal with them, and we're going to try that. So it'll be fun. One last thing to mention before Steve signs books is that you and Elizabeth have created an organization called History Matters. Do you want to tell us a little bit about that?
We deal with historic preservation around the country. We do around 3 to 5 events a year. We've done about 85, 90 events and raised about $1 million for historic preservation. And we do it by going into a community, mainly teaching our writers' workshop is the number one way we do it. I teach 3 hours, she teaches an hour, and it's a 4-hour workshop. You pay a fee to come into the workshop, and all of that money goes to the project. We don't charge to come, we don't charge expenses, we pay our own way to be there. So every month, everything goes there. So we've done quite a bit of those. We do galas, we do luncheons, we do dinners, all things to raise money and to raise awareness for local preservation, because no one's going to save your local treasures. You're it. You got to save your own, and you're on your own. And so we try to help out. And as I said, we do 3 to 5 a year. And if anybody's got something, they can go to my website, steveberry.org, and send us an email. We'll see if we can come and help you.
Very exciting. Mm-hmm. We have perhaps fewer, but they're fabulous. So there we go. Mm-hmm. Anybody have a final question
Any more
before
questions?
we break up?
Yes, ma'am. No, not at all. I'll be honest with you. I was a terrible student. I'm sorry to say. I know that's going to break you. I was a terrible high school student, though I like to read. I wrote on my own. I like to read by myself. I did like that, but I was not a very good student, and I was a terrible college student to my second year in college, and then I buckled down, and I did very well from that point on. But I just didn't have that learning bug for some reason. I like to read though, and I read a lot. And history always fascinated me. Absolutely, always fascinated me. But I'd like to say I was this great student and I did it, but I went and I was a terrible writer. I didn't have the discipline then. The little voice had not started in my head yet. The little voice didn't start in my head till I was about 28. Maybe 27, 28, and that's when the little voice started. And I remember when it started in the late 80s. I didn't know what it was. It kept telling me to write. Go see, you need to write. I said, why? I don't know what to write. You need to write. You need to write. And so I piddled with it every once in a while. It was finally in 1990 that I sat down and got serious about it, and the voice went quiet. It shuts up then when you write. So every writer I know has that little voice, and it's there, and mine started about that time, and it changed for me, and because I was a chemistry major in college, and I was actually accepted to medical school, and I turned it down and went to law school instead. So I switched over. So I became a pretty good student the last 3 years of college, but and I didn't like law school at all. I didn't really care for it too much. Law school, you just have to endure. You just got to get through it, but I enjoyed, when I started practicing law, I enjoyed doing things. When I was a county commissioner, I was not the guy you would put on a committee to talk about something. You put me on the group that's actually going to do it, and that's what I always was. Yes, sir, Alex.
We heard it before, but some people haven't. Maybe you became an incredibly great writer. I mean, your books are fascinating, from the first one to the last.
I paid him.
But why don't you tell
I paid him.
people?
Why he's in your book,
I
right?
paid him, yeah.
Tell these people how long it took you to really. I mean, how you tried and tried and tried, and how many times.
Yeah, I mean, if you don't know the story, I didn't write my first word. I was 35. From the day I wrote my first word to the day I sold my first word was 12 years. And I wrote 8 manuscripts during that time, and 5 went to New York publishing houses. They were rejected 85 times. So it was a very long process for me to get published. It didn't happen, and I'll be honest with you, I was not a Superman. I quit 3 times during that process. I said, this is a total waste of time. But that little voice again. That little voice every few days would say, the pity party's over, now get back to work and let's go, or I'm going to drive you crazy. And so I stuck with it till one day the world changed. When the world changed, I caught a break one day, and I was in the right place at the right time on the 86th time, 12 years after the fact. So I tell people all the time, I'm a living proof. Don't tell me you can't do it. I mean, I started with Zippo, nothing, and I actually pulled it off, so it can be done, yes.
I think this gentleman way over there.
What? Yes, sir. Typical day for me? Well, the typical day for me is I go to work about 6:30 in the morning. I'm a morning person, where Diana's just the opposite. She works in the middle of the night. She likes to work from 11 at night to 6 in the morning. Yeah, no, Diana Gabaldon is just the opposite. She works in the middle of the night, and you have to find where your good time is. And mine is 6:30 to about 11. And I can do my 1,000 words usually around that time. I try to do 1,000 words a day. Then I work after lunch for a couple of hours. Maybe about 2 o'clock, 2:30, I've had enough. That's 6 hours of going at it, and so that's about enough. And so I go do other things at that point. 5 days a week. I work on the weekends if I feel like it. If I don't feel like it, I don't feel guilty about it. During the week, it doesn't matter if I feel like it or not. Got to work. Got to go to work. I do not work the month of April because I'm on tour. So there's 0 will be done, but that's factored into the schedule. So we know that I won't do it. I cannot write on the road. Not like my friend Jim Rollins, who could literally be here talking to you and typing on his computer right here at the same time.
And has been known to do that.
He could do that in a heartbeat. I can't not do that. He typed in a C-140 over Iraq. C-140. He's typing on that thing the whole time. It's amazing to me. I don't know how he does it. So that's my day, and I stick to that schedule, and if I can do that, I can have the book out in a year. And I need it in a year. I have 12 months to produce a novel. and that's the schedule I'm on.
Okay, but can you remind us how much of it is thinking about it and how much of it is actually
90% is thinking about it, 10% is actually writing it.
So when you're not doing that, you're still thinking.
I'm thinking about right now.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So you are actually working.
I'm thinking about right this minute, yeah. I've actually stopped in the middle of something, and Elizabeth says, and she looks over at me, she knows that I'm plotting in my head, and I've hit something that's occurred to me that's very interesting. No, I think about the novel constantly. I do not. It's not a moment I'm not thinking about the novel. So that's the just the way it is. I mean, this is the way it is. Now, the future of publishing is extremely bright, in my opinion. I think it's going to be wonderful.
It's brightening all the time.
It's getting even brighter. I mean, we've seen a resurgence in hardcovers. E-books have leveled. Hardcovers are coming back a little bit. We love to sell hardcovers, right? We love hardcovers. We like all that, and so everything is looking, better. Feel better about it. There's more consolidation. It's all consolidated. When I first started, there were 18 publishers. Now there's 8. So there's a consolidation in there.
Yeah, but we're leaving out the fact that there's absolutely mushrooming in all directions, all kinds of small presses.
Oh God, yeah, there's thousands.
I'm getting more on average. I get 300 books a month. I used to get maybe 200, and it might even be closer to 400. Steve will tell you he looks at all those books to write a book. I have to look at those books every month to figure out what books to authors to bring here and what books to recommend to you. And I really do triage. There are not a lot of books that I've read the middle of in recent times because I just can't.
I can tell you the same thing. I sympathize with you on that.
I mean, I can read an ordinary book in under 2 hours, but sometimes I have to really cut it down. But you know what? And this as readers. If the first page doesn't grab you, if you don't like the voice that's talking to you, some people feel driven to, once you start a book, it's like compulsory. It's like cleaning your plate. Leftover from the Depression or same thing. One of the most liberating things you can do, don't finish a bad book. It's your time. Just put it down. Think of me putting it down. Pick up another one because there's just a multitude of books.
And indie publishing's gone through the roof. So you have an enormous amount of indie publishing now, and there's folks that do it, really, really well. So it's got really.
And the other good news is there are more and more paths to publishing for people who want to write too.
Yeah. No longer is New York the gateway. You don't have a 26-year-old sitting up there determining your life. My entire life was determined by a 24-year-old. Mark Devani was 24 years old when he bought it. He just got out of college. So my entire life was determined by a guy who just got out of college.
He just didn't know any better.
No, he's brilliant is what he was.
Well, on that note, why don't we thank Steve for coming to see us again? And I want to thank Gary for passing out the letter, which somehow we'd managed to leave in the back. But so all of you who have a book should have a letter, a Smithsonian bookmark, and a number for the signing line. So here's what I'm going to ask you to do. If all of you will just stay seated for a moment. Well, those of you over there, please stand up and fold up your chairs and move them against the wall out of the way. This is the lawyer in me. I don't want anybody getting hurt at any of our events, so we try to do this in a stately manner. Steve is going to go over to that little table as soon as we clear a pathway. All right, and if you guys next, you're the next group, if you'd stand up and fold up your chairs and move them against the wall. And so we've given you numbers. If you would line up in front of that little wooden table over there by number, that would be absolutely great. And you can ask Steve if he'd let you take a photo, but if you do, please turn off your flash. And if you don't know how, I'll get Jeffrey out here to show you.